Hello and welcome to another video. I want to start off today by telling you a story. So when I was a young lad, I wanted to play the guitar. And for a while, I'd been learning to play the keyboard. But I wasn't that interested in playing the keyboard. I just did it because one of my friends did it. But as I got a little bit older, probably around the age of like 13, 14 maybe, 12, 13, 14, I started to develop my own taste in music. And that kind of manifested in me wanting to play the guitar, as many a young lad or lass has done in the past. And so I approached my parents and, I said that I wanted to play the guitar, and they said, no, you play the keyboard. You've been having keyboard lessons for some time now. Just keep playing the keyboard. But I didn't really want to play the keyboard. I wasn't necessarily that happy with it. And, I'd get all these magazines and look at these pictures of famous guitar players and bands, and it all seemed so appealing and far, far away, and I just wanted to play the guitar. Eventually, though, my parents did sort of relent, and they let me play the guitar. I saved up some money and bought my first guitar. And I had some lessons with a guitar teacher, and I did music at high school, GCSE music. And so that was all good. And so as a young lad, probably 14, 15, going on to be 16, I was quite happy and content, and fairly sure that eventually one day I would be a famous guitar player in some kind of metal band, I guess. And that seemed like that would be the case. That was what fate had in store for me. It didn't really matter what anyone else said. That was what was going to happen. So it came to leaving high school and having to choose what subjects I would do at college. And I, of course, wanted to do music, but my parents were vehemently against the idea and said, no, sir. You need to do something sensible. You've had your time now. You've done your GCSE. You've done your music at high school, but you need to think about a job and a career. And so you need to go away and do some A-levels. And so at that time in the UK, you would choose your A-levels, and usually would be like 3 subjects. And then after that, you could go to university. So you need to think about what you're going to do with your life. And what kind of job you want, etc., and you need to choose your A-levels. I was like, well, I just want to play guitar, so I'm not interested in any of that, and it caused quite a lot of argument in the household. Eventually, my parents won, as I guess many parents do, and so I chose my A-levels, and I chose maths, physics, and geology. Don't know why. I think I had some idea that if I did physics, I would learn about sound, and that might help me to become a sound engineer, maybe. And that was a real job that wasn't playing in a band, that was, sort of acceptable to my parents. And maths kind of went along with physics. Geology was just, well, you got to choose something, and I'd always kind of been interested in fossils and dinosaurs and whatever, so geology. Anyway, 2 years of doing A-levels, and during that time I just kind of pursued music as a hobby. I played in bands, whatever, and that, I guess, was my kind of education, was that period of playing in bands, and I learned a lot through that time. From the musicians that I would hang around with, and just playing lots of gigs and so on. Eventually, though, you move on and you go to university. So I went to university, and because I'd had that 2 years where I hadn't been focused on music, the obvious thing was to do something at uni that was related to one of those three subjects: maths, physics, or geology. So I chose geology because that was the only one I was really interested in, and it was also the one that I got the highest grades in. So I did geology. I went to the University of Birmingham and I studied geology for 4 years because I went on to do a master's there as well. And again, throughout that whole time, my education, my musical education, I guess, didn't really stop because I was kind of like self-taught, and I just kept, teaching myself things, learning things from other people, from, again, playing in bands and jamming with other musicians. And I was still having guitar lessons as well, and so on. And, eventually uni comes to an end and I have to think, what am I going to do now? Still very passionate about music, but I've now got a degree in geology, and you need to think about what you're going to do for a job. So I guess I kind of just tried to delay the inevitable, and I took a year out and I went and lived in China for a year and spent that time teaching English to school children in China. And that was great, but that was a whole year of not really doing any music. The first thing I did, like the first couple of days of arriving in China, the first thing I did was I went out and bought a guitar, because I didn't have a guitar with me, and there was no way that I could have survived an entire year without playing the guitar. So I had a guitar, and although I wasn't able to pursue music, I was still able to sort of just play and practice. I took a load of sheet music with me because I played classical guitar at the time, as well as rock stuff and whatever. So I took a load of sheet music with me to practice. My guitar teacher gave me loads of sheet music. And then at some point I had this little mini disc recorder that I bought while I was there. And I would use that to just record riffs and ideas and little songs. And I started writing songs and I started singing for the first time. And I just started collecting all this stuff with the idea that eventually I would get home and I could start a band and turn all of these songs and things into, an album or whatever, and all the rest of it. So I was collecting all this material, and really I suppose I was just maintaining myself as a musician, just playing by myself. And I had an amazing time in China, and I learned a lot, and it was an amazing experience and so on. But eventually I had to come home, and upon arriving home, after the first sort of few days or whatever of being at home, you have to face that. Well, I had to face that same adversity, which was, what are you going to do for a job? How are you going to earn a living? And I'd been thinking about that, whilst I was in China and what I would do. But it kind of hit hard once, after the first week or so of being back. What are you going to do for a job? And I thought, well, maybe I'll just go off and go to another country and teach English there. But that wasn't going to fly. So I decided to enroll on another course at uni to train as a teacher, a high school teacher. And I was going to train as a science teacher because I've got my degree in geology, and that kind of funnels into science. There's a small amount of geology in the science curriculum in high school, so I could train to be a science teacher. And I thought, once I've done that, once I've got that qualification, I could be a teacher anywhere. I could go off traveling and be a teacher and do that. And that was, I guess that was a real kind of, that period was really hard. The experience of being on that teaching course, that trainee teaching course, and having to go into schools and work in schools was really hard. And I will always say that, that being a high school teacher is possibly one of the hardest jobs that anyone could do. It was tough, and throughout that time, I barely picked up the guitar. I barely did any music at all. I just didn't have time because it was lesson planning and preparation and all the rest of it, marking and so on. And that wasn't even on a full-time timetable because we were student teachers. We were on reduced timetables, so I couldn't really do anything musical. And I think that kind of got to me, you know. And I sort of had to battle a lot of inner demons, and I was not in a very good place at that time. And it was around about sort of the Easter period, which it is now, that I decided that I just could not go on with that, and I quit. I didn't tell my parents, so I came back from uni in the Easter break, and my dad was kind of concerned that I wasn't sort of myself, and he's like, "Your mom's worried about you, we're worried about you, what's going on, you know, is everything okay?" And I was like, "Well, actually it's not, I've quit." And so that news did not go down well, and they're like, "Why have you quit? This is not good. You know, you're meant to be going into this profession and getting a job, a proper job that's gonna, you know, you can earn a living. What are you gonna do now?" I was like, "I don't know what I'm gonna do now, but I know that I don't want to do that." And the next sort of, I don't know, the rest of that year and the next year on, I sort of drifted in and out of jobs, working in factories and, you know, doing anything really to just earn a bit of money. But at the same time, I thought, well, I'm going to try and build up my own business teaching guitar lessons. I'd been teaching guitar lessons for a little while whilst doing the uni course, and I'd also taught guitar lessons before when I was at uni and before I went to China, so I'd got some experience with that, and I thought, why don't I just try and make that into a successful business, teaching guitar to people, and that will be my livelihood. But that, you know, that itself caused a lot of tension with my parents, because they are very much from an older generation with a background, a sort of working background, and the idea of earning a living from teaching guitar was just very alien to them. And you know, for them, that was a risky thing that would never generate an income that would be sufficient enough. And so they were very, very critical of that idea and really wanted me to get a proper 9-to-5 job, maybe in one of these factories that I could sort of work my way up into a, you know, a managerial position or something like that. I don't know. So there were a lot of battles and a lot of struggles, and I would say that my mental health at that time really kind of dipped, and it was a hard time for me. I didn't really know who I was or what I wanted to do, but I knew that music was something that was important to me, and you know, I struggled with relationships that I was in at that time as well, because I felt that the people that I was with didn't really understand what I was trying to do either, and it was a real low point in my life, I would say. But you know, as time went on, and I worked, and I built up a small, you know, a small bunch of people that came for lessons and a client base, or whatever you want to call it. And I slowly started to build this thing into a viable business where I was teaching quite a lot of lessons each week. And I was teaching from home, I was teaching from a couple of music shops, and I was doing peripatetic lessons around school. So I'd got a lot of people that I was teaching. And slowly, that started to actually become a real source of income that I could pay the bills and buy a house and you know, all the things that everybody would like to do with their life. And really, that eventually, that's what happened. So, I bought a house, and I was able to pay the mortgage for that, and so on. And the business kept going steadily and steadily up and up and up. And it was a successful business. My parents, I think, were sort of happier with that, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it wasn't that they're like cruel or evil or anything. They just wanted me to be secure and to have some kind of income. And once they could never see that could happen from music. But once that was a possibility, and they could see that actually this business was working, then they were more supportive of it. And I'm not wanting to be critical of my parents, because throughout my entire life they've been there and they've been supportive of everything that I've done. But as I'm sure many people have experienced, there will always be tensions between children and parents. Anyway, eventually they kind of came around, and that was okay. And so, the guitar business was going well. I think I probably at some point started to feel, though, that I wanted to do something more, and I started looking for jobs. And that's when, in fact, I don't even think I was looking for jobs. I think it just kind of came up that somebody posted an advert somewhere. I don't even know, but I saw an advert for a teaching job at a music college. And I had done a little bit of teaching since then as well at another college, but not teaching music, just for a bit of extra cash, one day a week. And so I'd seen this job ad, teaching music at a college, and it was the college that I had wanted to go to when I was at high school. I wanted to go there and do music when I left high school, but that didn't happen. So it was kind of like, this is a really good college, I'd like to get this job. And it will allow me to expand professionally or whatever from just teaching guitar lessons. So I went for the interview, I did the interview, and I was very nervous but also very excited, and I got the job. And that was 2019, and then COVID hit. And we all know that story. But yeah, so I got that job, and then we had COVID. And that was the time when I discovered Modular Synth. And throughout the next couple of years, I spent a lot of time learning about Modular and making music with Modular and continuing to work. The guitar lessons kind of like petered off a little bit, and the work in college became my main or my sole source of income. Still playing in a lot of bands, but Modular was becoming more of a focus for me, sort of post-COVID. And eventually, started this YouTube channel, and this seems to be going quite well so far, touch wood. And in a funny kind of like roundabout way, that sort of dream that I had of being a famous guitar player when I was at high school and wanting to have this experience and this career of playing music and so on, which seemed as it was dashed at certain points, it actually kind of, in a roundabout way, has come true. I've had a lot of experience of playing in bands and playing a lot of gigs. And now I'm kind of like growing this YouTube channel, which at this point in time, I think there's, about 1,500 people subscribed to the channel, which is obviously it's not a huge channel. But it does kind of have this feeling that I have kind of achieved what I wanted to do in a roundabout way as a high school student. But it's the path. That path has not been it's been an up and then a down and then a little bit up and then a bigger down, and then it's only in these last few years that it's gone up. And that is my life story. Good God, that took a long time, didn't it? Perhaps that's a story that some of you might be able to relate to, the ups and downs and the battles that you've faced throughout your life, to be able to do music and to be able to continue with doing music. However, the reason that I wanted to tell that story, I was hoping it would be a bit shorter than that, but I've waffled on, so that's okay. The reason that I wanted to tell that story, though, is because I tried to tell it in a way that fits to the narrative of the hero's, what's often called the hero's journey. I'm not sure that I did it that well because I was kind of making it up as I was going along, although everything's true, but I hadn't really planned it out in advance. But I was trying to stick to that hero's journey narrative. So if you've not heard of the hero's journey, this is an archetypal story that exists and has existed throughout human history. And if you look at any kind of major, well, if you look at any kind of story, whether it be a film or a TV show or a book or whatever, you can often map it to the hero's journey. And the way it works is that the hero, often a reluctant hero, but not always, starts out in their sort of their home position. They're just living their life, whatever. And then something will happen which will sort of draw them away, onto some arc of learning some kind of craft or developing themselves in some way, until they face an enemy, and they will face that enemy and they will fail, and they will fall to the depths of despair because of that failure, and it will force them to look in on themselves and rethink who they are and whatever, and go on another little sort of journey upward, and eventually they will face the enemy again in a final battle, we might say, and be victorious and go on to whatever happens after victory. So for me, in my story, my starting point is that place in high school where, I'm happily just playing the keyboard, whatever, having my music lessons. But then I kind of discover this thing called rock music and metal, and that takes me on a trajectory where I want to do something different and I want to play the guitar. And I sort of have my developmental years where I'm teaching myself, I'm having guitar lessons, all the rest of it. But then I hit my first battle, which is the parents, and it doesn't go well. My aspirations are dashed, and I end up doing something completely different. And that again is another sort of developmental phase. In actual fact, I probably had two of these battles where I fail. But in that failure, I sort of redraw myself and go on to the victory, which is Modular Synth and this YouTube channel and everything else that has happened in the last few years. So not a great job, but I'm kind of trying to highlight that little story there. If we look at any of the big blockbuster films, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Harry Potter, Star Wars, even comedy rom-com programs where the hero is maybe it's the boy or the girl that wants to get the other boy or girl, and they have to go through some kind of development to better themselves. They get turned down, but then eventually the person sees them for who they are. They've changed, they've gone through some kind of character development, and eventually they get that is the story. That's the hero's journey. How can we take advantage of that as musicians? Well, I think it's something that you can follow as a structure within your music. And I kind of very briefly touched on the idea of structure in a previous video. But if you are somebody who's making music and a lot of the time you kind of you're looping stuff, or you're stuck in a loop and you never seem to sort of get anywhere with the progression of a track, you can use this idea of the hero's journey to map out a piece of music. And because because as humans we're so used to seeing this story, we kind of instinctively recognize it even when it's not explicitly pointed out or it's not explicitly obvious, because, for example, in a piece of music there's not necessarily a story there. There's no words telling you what's happening, unless it's a singing song. But we can recognize these elements. And I would suggest that, if you go out and listen to some music and try and see if you can hear the rises and falls and the changes in shifts in energy throughout the music that sort of suggest or hint towards this structure, because it is there in an awful lot of music. But essentially, if we think about structuring a piece of music, as I said in a previous video, I will often start with like the peak of the music, which we could think of as the final battle, that climax where the hero is facing the enemy for the final time and they're going to defeat them. That is the peak of the music, and maybe sort of work out sideways from there. So you might start your piece of music with a fairly sort of you kind of got to set the scene. You've got to establish your rhythm, your tempo, your melody, all of that at the beginning, and then slowly that's going to develop into something else. Things are going to change within the music. You're going to bring in more parts, more voices, whatever it might be, and you might sort of build that up to a peak, and then it might drop. You might have a sort of that section representing the first battle and failure, which drops to a subdued, quieter section, which ultimately has got to build up to the climax, which is the final battle. From there, once you've got that climax, then you're home dry really, because then it's just working out the ending and the victory of the song. So some pieces of music that I think of to sort of listen out for, and there's one in particular that is actually just a track that I really love, but is a great example of this, and I'm gonna have to I really love it, but I can't remember what it's called. It's by the band Vessels. If you know Vessels, they are one of my favourite bands, and the track is Elliptic. So if you listen to this track Elliptic and try and follow the structure of it and see if you can map it to that hero's journey, because I think it is actually a track that really does fit quite well to the hero's journey. And this is definitely something which is more prominent in dance music, with build-ups and drops and so on, but actually it applies to all music, and it's something that I think can be very helpful when you are working with Modular, just to try and think about this structure. And a lot of the time it's really thinking about the energy of the music and how that is building and dropping and building to a bigger height and dropping maybe. So I have been talking for quite a long time, and I don't usually make videos that are quite so long, so I will finish there. Let me know though, is this idea of the hero's journey, is it something that you are aware of, that you sort of see in other music, and is it something that you've maybe even used, even if it's not necessarily knowing that it was the hero's journey, but that kind of structure, or is it something that you think will be helpful for you in the future? Let me know in the comments below, and as ever, if you found this interesting, my waffling, rambling, whatever you want to call it, then thank you for watching. Please hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much. Cheerio.